My name's Sophie Payton and I'm a fourth year medical student at Western Sydney.
Terrific, Sophie. And recently you spent some time in the Kimberley. Where did you go?
In the Kimberleys, I flew into a place called Kununurra, which is kind of one of the bigger towns in the Kimberleys. And then I was kind of in between Kununurra and Wyndham, which are kind of, two of the bigger towns there. And then I also flew out to a whole lot of different outreach clinics kind of all over the Kimberleys, which was great.
And what was your flight like to Kununurra?
It was good. I flew via Darwin and then to Kununurra. It was like a pretty small plane, but not as small as the ones that I went on later. But yeah, it's kind of just, it's just such a beautiful flight in, and all the flights that I did there were just stunning. Yeah.
Terrific. And who were you with when you went to the Kimberley? Were you with a clinic or an individual?
No, so I flew there by myself, and then I was kind of going in between two different places. So in Kununurra, I was working at the hospital there, and so then that was kind of wherever, but I was mostly like in the emergency department or in theatres. And then I was mostly with a doctor when I drove to Wyndham, which was about an hour down the road, and I was working with the doctor there. It's about a 2-doctor clinic, and I was with the doctor kind of either in the emergency or GP part of the hospital, but it's so tiny, it's kind of just all in one.
Terrific. And so tell me more about Kununurra Hospital.
So Kununurra Hospital is actually quite a big hospital because it's kind of a bit of a catchment for all the towns around there. So that one's got an emergency department, it's got theatres, it's got birthing suite, but still, obviously, anything that's high risk, anything that's kind of a bit more complex will all get kind of sent out to Broome or Darwin. Whereas Wyndham, on the other hand, was pretty tiny because that was just serving the little town of Wyndham. So that was kind of just an emergency department / GP, and maybe like 4 or 5 ward beds, but most of the time they were empty.
Right. And so what were some of the things that you saw at Kununurra Hospital?
I feel like it was such a mixed bag of things you saw there. Like, I think my first day, I was so happy because a guy came in with like a fish hook through his finger, and I got to kind of do the nerve block and take it out, which is something I'd never done before. A lot of infections, a lot of because most of the population of Kununurra and Wyndham is Aboriginal, so a lot of the patients are Aboriginal, come in, and a lot of infections, just like chronic staph infections with abscesses, and that was a lot of it.
Okay. And in Wyndham, you said it was a 2-doctor clinic. How did the sort of things that you saw in Wyndham compare to Kununurra, or were they fairly similar?
Probably because Wyndham was a lot more like a GP clinic as well. You saw a lot of just typical issues, a lot of preventive health there. Both of the hospitals, but even more so Wyndham, was a lot of because it's like a one-stop shop. I think a lot of the patients there, it's sometimes the first or only time they're going to visit for the doctor for a while, maybe for a couple of years. So they kind of, when they come in, try and do everything at once. So it's the presenting problem, but then also it's all the preventative health measures, getting bloods, doing everything. So I think you saw a lot more of a holistic approach to medicine at Wyndham, whereas sometimes Kununurra operated the same way a hospital in a bigger city would.
Terrific. And what sort of hands-on things other than removing a fish hook did you have the opportunity to do?
So in emergency department, you do a lot of like bloods, cannulas, things like that. But definitely everywhere I went, as well as to the outreach clinics as well, I did a lot of, joint consultations where I would see the patient, do the whole history and workup, and then I would present to the doctor and kind of go from there. So that was really good. It was a lot of, getting to do the whole workup yourself and then just kind of getting this tick of approval from the doctor.
Fantastic. And the outreach clinics, can you tell me more about them?
Yeah, so from Kununurra, the doctors flew out to mostly kind of 2 to 3 clinics. So I went to 3, the Warman, Halls Creek and Columbaroo. And Warman was this beautiful little town. It was probably only like a 30-minute flight. And it was kind of a dirt runway, and they had all of them have about a nursing clinic, and then doctors will come in 1 to 2 times a week if they're lucky. If there's bad weather or there's any problems, maybe they'll see a doctor every 2 or 3 weeks, which is, you know, pretty poor. And but the clinics themselves, yeah, just beautiful. It's all the patients who kind of throughout the time have needed to see a doctor all kind of queue up and then quickly get seen. Colombo itself was about an hour by plane, and that was kind of right on the tip of Western Australia. Yeah, only get there by plane in the wet season, and it was this beautiful town right on the seaside, and they definitely suffered a lot in terms of healthcare provider, like availability. I know when I was there, I tried 3 times to get out. The first time there was bad weather. The second time there was actually rioting in town, and they'd closed down the clinic and the whole town because of the rioting and the safety issues for healthcare providers. But finally I got out on the 3rd time, and it was a really good experience. A lot of culture there as well.
Great. And can you think of any highlights that stand out that you remember more so than others?
Yeah, one of the outreach trips we did was out to Halls Creek, which is kind of another big town, sort of not quite as big as Kununurra, but relatively big. And I was with one of the doctors who does the antenatal clinic there, and he was a GP obstetrician. And it was just, I think, such a kind of a sobering experience, because I think we saw about eight women, and of them about 7 were high risk, and all of them in any city hospital would get kind of, fortnightly, every 3 or 4 weeks, antenatal checkups, but they'll probably only get 1 or 2. And I think that was just kind of really stood out to me a lot. And a lot of them were so very young girls, and I think, it's just definitely medicine that's quite different to what's practiced in the bigger cities.
And what was the most surprising thing? I mean, you hear about rural medicine and going out into remote areas, so you have a preconceived idea of what it might be like. What surprised you that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that you get a lot of lectures and talks at uni about Aboriginal health and about rural remote medicine, and you get all the statistics about, decreased life expectancy and increased maternal mortality and all of those things, which you can kind of understand on an intellectual level. But it's not until you go out to those towns that you kind of see what that looks like and what contributes to that. And I think that was what surprised me, was just how different the situation is there. And you can see all the chronic disease, things like rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease in very young children. I spoke to a man who had he'd had leprosy, things you don't think exist in Australia. Other things, like when I was in Wyndham buying fresh food, so I would go to the supermarket, and things like a cucumber could cost $5, and you can kind of understand how obesity and other chronic health diseases are just kind of almost unavoidable there. I think things like that are probably the big things that surprised me.
Yep. Now, you sent through some amazing photos. If other people are to go out into that area, what are some must-dos or things you highly recommend they go and check out?
So it's a stunning. I was very lucky because I got to go on all of the outreach flights. So I think seeing the Kimberleys from the air is amazing, although not always affordable. But I was very lucky that I met a doctor who took me up in a plane that he owned and got to see that, which was pretty good. But there's also the river there is beautiful. A lot of the locals go out in their boats and go exploring. There's so many water holes, a lot of four-wheel driving tracks. There's also a beautiful lake called Lake Argyll, which I'd never heard of before, and apparently it's the 2nd biggest man-made lake in the Southern Hemisphere or something, and that's absolutely stunning. Also just talking to local people, especially there's a lot of Aboriginal culture there and a lot of rock art, and I know I spoke to a lot of the women about hunting and things that we don't experience here, and it was just so fascinating to see. And yeah.
Fantastic. And what tips do you have for people heading out there to prepare themselves either mentally or practically?
I think it's one of those things you kind of just have to dive in head first. It's a bit hard to prepare yourself, but definitely probably getting a bit of an appreciation for Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal health. I think a lot of the local people will appreciate it a lot more if you go in with a bit of an understanding. Just having an open mind as well and just being non-judgmental. I think life is very different there. It happens at a different pace. And if you just kind of embrace it all rather than taking a critical look at it, it's a lot better. And just also just making friends with everyone, because a lot of the beauty of the Kimberleys you're never going to see if you get a rental car and just go off by yourself. You need to, find out where all the good spots are.
Get some local knowledge.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Any last words for anyone thinking about the Kimberley?
Probably just, if you get the opportunity, do it, because it was incredible. I feel like it's completely changed the direction that I want to take medicine, and I just fell in love with it. So if you get the chance, definitely jump on it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sophie.
Thank you.